They misled you and they deceived you. What they did was this. They redefined what being vaccinated was.
Then it was modified to prevent severe hospitalizations and illness, or severe illness and hospitalizations. That should have rung bells, shouldn't it? That modification of the sales pitch.
Yeah, well, there's been a sort of slippery slope.
But people quote that now like,
well, it seems to me it's the last thing they've got to hang on to. And I mean, and you've had guests in here that have said, look, you're 10 times more likely to die if you're unvaccinated. And it's become very clear how they can say that now.
Oh, how do they say it? How can they?
Well, it's how you define what vaccinated means. I mean, if you're looking at safety, it ought to mean the moment the first jab goes into your arm. The reason that some of the data supposedly has shown that the unvaccinated are so much more vulnerable is that you're not considered fully vaccinated until maybe a couple of weeks after your first dose. And then after your second, again, you
So it's a technical tweak.
Oh, look, absolutely, but it can hide a huge amounts of harm and seem to lump it into the unvaccinated
group. And give
group.
a plausible deniability when being questioned.
But if you define it properly from the moment that jab goes in the arm and look at what happens, actually the statistics flip.
Yeah.
And it does show that the unvaccinated actually are not big users of the health system and do not have poor outcomes.
The vaccine is ineffective for the first 6 weeks after the first shot. I'm assuming a two-shot, a two-dose vaccine like Pfizer or Moderna. And that during that period, the COVID infection rate goes up and the death rate goes up. And the data, the official data, do not count you as vaccinated until 2 weeks after the second shot. So the deaths that happened during that first 6 weeks are attributed to unvaccinated people, to the unvaccinated group, which is not, it's a trick. It's a statistical trick.
And I'll close by telling you something that our public health officials here did. You never got this information, so I came to talk about different things, but it's key that you understand. When they came to you and told you Canadians that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, they misled you and they deceived you because it happened in America. CDC did it, so we followed here. What they did was this. They redefined what being vaccinated was. They told you that for that 14, 15-day period post-shot, you were still unvaccinated. And that was the key. Why did they do that? So that the public health officials in Canada could come to you in the media and deceive the public and tell you that this was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. That was a falsehood, a gross falsehood. They were taking the vaccinated people who were becoming infected and hospitalized, and they were placing their events in the unvaccinated bucket just by a simple change in the definition. That is why somebody like me came today, so that I make sure that I share some information you didn't have. So when the media told you that we need to get all you unvaccinated people vaccinated, the public health officials at Health Canada, in fact, knew it was a lie. I am telling you, they knew it was a falsehood. I will go as far as saying a lie, because they took all of the events and put it in the unvaccinated bucket. So you, the public, said, oh my God, all these unvaccinated people are getting infected and hospitalized. I have to run and get a vaccine. You didn't understand that, no, those people were literally vaccinated. But VAC and Health Canada and CDC and FDA and NIH and NIAID and SAGE in England just tweaked the definition and told you even at 8 days post-vaccine, you are not vaccinated. So even if you died from the vaccine, you were counted as an unvaccinated. And that particular fact doomed the information that you were getting. You needed to be properly informed, and you were never. The Canadian public never had the balanced, open, explicit, transparent, evidence-based medicine information it needed to make proper informed decisions.
Onto vaccines, Jane gets a vaccine and 13 days later tests PCR positive with symptomatic COVID. Jane is classified as an unvaccinated COVID case. Peter gets a COVID vaccine and dies the next day. Peter's classified as an unvaccinated death. And so we started to analyse this all-cause mortality. Now the problem is that only the Office for National Statistics was providing the mortality data by vaccination status. And when we started doing this, we weren't aware of the extent to which they were underestimating the proportion of unvaccinated. But what we found was still quite remarkable. If you just plot by week, this is in 2021, the weekly mortality rate of the vaccinated against the unvaccinated for each age group, then superficially, in each of the older age groups at least, the data seemed to support the claim that the mortality rate of the vaccinated was lower than that of the unvaccinated. But note this strange peak, which happens at the same time the first vax rollout for this age group peaks. And we see exactly the same peaks at different times when the rollout for those age groups peaked in all of the other age groups. And it turns out this peak has got nothing to do with COVID deaths, which are minimal at that time. To show that COVID has got nothing to do with the strange peaks, here's the 60 to 69 plot of non-COVID mortality. The peak shown explicitly coincides with the vaccine rollout peak. I mean, why would the unvaccinated suddenly start dying of non-COVID mortality at a much higher rate when the vaccine rollout peaks? And even when things steady, the non-COVID deaths among the vaccinated is lower, which is strange. In our analysis of the data, we showed that the only reasonable explanation for this was that people dying shortly after vaccination were being classified as unvaccinated, and such a misclassification is known to cause exactly the statistical artifact seen in these graphs. And we wrote up our analysis in this report and showed that when the data are adjusted for the misclassification, there's no evidence of a decrease in all-cause mortality of the vaccinated, but rather a small increase shortly after vaccination.
Christoph Kubandner ist Professor für Psychologie an der Universität Regensburg. Er publizierte auch zu methodischen Aspekten der Corona-Pandemie in internationalen Fachzeitschriften. Bei einer Analyse der Corona-Zahlen stieß er auf eine englische Studie, die ihn alarmierte.
Was praktisch die Ausgangsbasis der englischen Statistikergruppe war, die Sterberate für die blaue Kurve, das sind die ungeimpften Personen, und die orangene Kurve, das sind die geimpften Personen. Aber an der Stelle ist den englischen Statistikern was sehr Interessantes visuell aufgefallen, was man, glaube ich, auch als Laie sehr gut sehen kann. Die Kurve der Ungeimpften, die hat so einen ganz eigenartigen Peak. Also man sieht ja, das läuft so dahin und plötzlich verdreifacht bis vervierfacht sich plötzlich die Sterberate. Und es passiert immer zu unterschiedlichen Zeitpunkten. Und dann haben sich die englischen Statistiker gefragt, was könnte hier denn dahinter stecken? Dann haben sie bemerkt, dass genau zu diesen Zeitpunkten in England geimpft wurde.
Zu Jahresbeginn 2021 begann in England die Impfaktion. Zunächst wurden vorwiegend die über 80-Jährigen geimpft. In dieser Altersgruppe erreicht die Sterbekurve Ende Januar ihren Höhepunkt. Die 70-Jährigen wurden im Schnitt einen Monat später geimpft und die Todesfälle zeigen Ende Februar das Maximum. Im März kommen schließlich die 60-Jährigen dran und auch hier klettert parallel dazu das Sterberisiko der ungeimpften Personen. Ein vollständig absurder Effekt, denn warum sollten sich die Covid-Impfaktionen auf die Ungeimpften auswirken?
Und dann sind sie draufgekommen, offenbar, dass in England Personen, die die Erstimpfung erhalten haben, wo aber noch nicht 2 Wochen nach der Erstimpfung vergangen sind, dass diese Personen als ungeimpft geführt werden. Und jetzt sehen wir was absolut Besorgniserregendes. Vermutlich, das ist die Vermutung der englischen Statistiker, kommt diese Verdrei- bis Vervierfachung der Sterberate hier daher, dass praktisch Todesfälle aus der geimpften Gruppe, weil sie eben noch nicht 2 Wochen über der Impfung waren, dass diese Todesfälle der Gruppe der Ungeimpften zugeschlagen wurden.
I'm sure there's something that you'll be aware of as well, is that whether or not someone is classified as vaccinated or not, right, or 1 dose, 2 dose, 3 dose, whatever, is susceptible to, let's say, significant manipulation. Some of it deliberate, some of it not. So in the case of, we know that for any of the effectiveness studies, they'll say, well, you can't consider the vaccine to be effective until you've had it for 2 weeks. So anybody who gets COVID in that time, we don't count them as a COVID case. So you've got this unbelievable built-in bias where you're guaranteed, even with a known placebo that you're given, you'd get a statistical artifact which shows very high efficacy. And then waiting.
I understood that. Now
it's a pure statistical artifact. You get that. Similarly, if you get delayed reporting, you get the same thing. But the same thing happens with deaths, and this is really bad. So they'll claim, no, if someone has had the vaccine and dies 24 hours later, no, we classify that as a vaccinated death. No, we know that doesn't happen. We know that most of the people who die shortly after the first dose are classified as unvaccinated. We know that most of the people who die shortly after the second dose are classified as 1 dose. So you get this misclassification. And that misclassification is skewing all of their data, right? To the extent that we know, right? So that skews any results they claim about safety and efficacy, because they claim, well, no, the data is showing that it is both, safe and effective.
My understanding is in New Zealand rules that someone is not vaccinated until 2 weeks have elapsed as well, having received both doses in New Zealand and the approved vaccines in New Zealand. So that's a very broad definition of unvaccinated. So I guess figures could be manipulated. Figures from the Ministry of Health could be changed in all sorts of ways. Often yeah. I've seen the rules change about how they record things. It's a learning experience for everybody, but it's adverse as far as I can see.
Yeah, look, Brenton, that's certainly something we've been banging on about, is the what's almost seems like a deliberate misclassification of who's vaccinated and unvaccinated. From a safety or a side effect perspective, really, the moment the needle goes in the arm, somebody should be considered vaccinated, and they should be watched, as in fact was promised would happen before the vaccine rollout. We were told that everybody vaccinated would be followed up. Whereas it turns out that in some of the studies that supposedly show that you're less likely to have a serious outcome with the shots, the definition, as you say, was twisted. You weren't considered vaccinated until maybe even after your second shot, or in the case of Sweden, which was turned up by an OIA request that was made by some doctors and journalists. They acknowledged that you'd be vaccinated for 2 weeks after the first jab, and then you'd have the second jab, and then you'd be considered unvaccinated again for another 2 weeks.
Yes.
And that's a recognition that you're more likely to catch COVID just after you've received a jab. So if you wanted to hide or distort, trivialize what was going on, that would be a way to do it. Now, in fact, if you change the definitions, and you just use from the moment the needle goes in, the first time, as then meaning somebody's vaccinated, the statistics actually flip. They really do. So we've been told, over and over that vaccination protects you from serious outcomes. But looking at the government's own figures itself, that's just, not correct.
And we have this article by Dr. Guy Hatchard. This is from June 16th, 2022. Shining a light in dark places. 10 ways the government controls the pandemic narrative. And at number 2, we have poor definition of unvaccinated status. The Ministry of Health counts all people who have had just one jab as unvaccinated. No one is counted as vaccinated who received their jab less than 7 days ago. So, for example, if a person catches COVID during the week after vaccination and then dies 4 weeks later, or they have only had one jab, they are counted as an unvaccinated COVID death. This also artificially inflates rates for the unvaccinated and conversely hides hospitalizations and deaths among the vaccinated.